Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I never thought I'd be the type of person to get into a fight with a major corporation. I'm what you might call a quiet person who keeps to himself. My family has owned this ranch for 3 generations now, and we've always been the type to mind our own business and expect others to do the same. But sometimes people mistake being quiet for being weak, and that's where they make their first mistake. The ranch sits on about 800 acres in a part of the state where land still means something. Most of it is rolling hills and pasture, but there's one corner that's always been special to us. We call it the highway corner because it borders the state highway that runs north to the county seat. It's probably the most valuable part of our property because of the road access, but we've kept it pristine all these years. There's a little creek that runs through it, and from the small hill you can see for miles across the valley. My grandfather used to say it was God's front porch, and we never had the heart to do anything with it except enjoy the view. I'm a records keeper by nature. Some people might call it obsessive, but I prefer thorough. Every survey, every permit, every piece of paperwork related to this ranch going back to 1970 is stored in a fireproof safe in my office. My wife used to joke that I could probably tell you where every fence post was installed and when, and she wasn't far off. When you own land that's been in your family this long, you learn to document everything because there's always someone who thinks they know better than you about what's yours. 2 weeks ago, I had to leave the ranch to deal with a family emergency. My brother had been in an accident 3 states over, and my wife and I drove out to help his family get through the worst of it. It was one of those situations where you drop everything and go, which we did. We arranged for our neighbor to check on the livestock and figured everything else could wait until we got back. The drive home was long and exhausting. We'd been gone 14 days, and I was looking forward to getting back to our routine. The familiar sight of our land as we turned off the highway should have been comforting, but something was wrong. There was a sound that didn't belong, the deep rumble of heavy machinery coming from the direction of the highway corner. As we got closer to the house, the noise got louder. It wasn't the sound of farming equipment that I knew by heart. This was industrial construction noise, the kind that comes from earth movers and heavy trucks. I pulled up to the house and told my wife I'd be right back. Something was very wrong. I climbed into my pickup and drove the quarter-mile of ranch road that led to the highway corner. What I saw when I crested the small hill made my blood run cold. Where there had been pristine pasture and the gentle slope down to the creek, there was now a massive gravel pad that looked to be about 200 feet by 200 feet. A chain-link fence was going up around the perimeter, and 2 enormous industrial shipping containers sat in the middle of it all. The containers were painted industrial blue and had Omni Logistics painted on the sides in yellow letters. I sat in my truck for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. This was my land, my family's land, the land my grandfather had sworn would never be developed. And now there was what looked like the beginning of some kind of industrial depot right in the middle of it. I parked near the gate they'd installed in the fence and walked over to where a man in a hard hat was standing with a clipboard, directing workers who were setting fence posts. He was probably in his 40s, wearing a company polo shirt and the kind of boots that had never seen real work. Everything about him screamed middle management. When I approached, he didn't look up from his clipboard. I stood there for a moment waiting for him to acknowledge me, but he just kept marking things off on his list. "Excuse me," I said finally. He glanced up with the kind of look you give someone who's interrupting something important. "Yeah? I'm the owner of this land. What's going on here?" That got his attention. He straightened up and looked at me like I was a puzzle he needed to solve. "You're the owner? Of this section here?" He gestured at the ground around us. "Of all of it," I said, sweeping my arm to indicate the surrounding area. "This entire corner of the ranch belongs to me and my family. Has for 60 years. He laughed. Actually laughed. Like I'd told him a joke. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but we have a lease agreement for this site. Everything's been cleared through legal." He tapped his clipboard like it contained all the wisdom of the world. "A lease agreement with who?" "The property owner. Look, I don't have time for this. I'm Derek, the site manager, and we've got a schedule to keep. If you think there's some kind of problem, you need to take it up with corporate." "Derek." I filed the name away for later. "There is a problem. This is private property, and you're trespassing." Derek's laugh was nastier this time. "Trespassing? Buddy, look around. We've got $250,000 in gravel and equipment here. We've got contracts. We've got permits. We didn't just show up and start digging holes for fun." "Show me the lease agreement." "I don't have to show you anything. Like I said, if you've got a problem, take it up with corporate." I looked around the site more carefully. The gravel pad was huge and perfectly level. They'd obviously moved a lot of earth to create it. The containers were positioned like they planned to stack more on top of them. This wasn't a temporary setup. This was permanent infrastructure. How long have you been working on this? We started the site prep a week ago. Ground was perfect for it, too. Nice and flat, good drainage, better than the original site, to be honest. The original site? Derek seemed to realize he'd said something he shouldn't have. He shrugged. Look, the important thing is we're here now and we're not going anywhere. The contract is signed, the gravel is down, and will be operational before the end of the month. I noticed something else as I looked at the containers. There were small diamond-shaped placards on the sides, hazardous material warnings. This wasn't just a storage depot, they were planning to store chemicals or other dangerous materials on my land. Those containers are marked for hazardous materials. That's right, we're licensed for that, everything's by the book. On my land, without my permission. Derek's patience was clearly wearing thin. Look, old-timer, I don't know what your deal is, but here's the reality. The gravel is down. The contract is signed, the permits are filed. If you think you have some kind of claim here, hire a lawyer and sue us. But I can tell you right now, we'll be done with this project and operational before you even get a court date. That's just how the real world works. He turned back to his clipboard like the conversation was over. I stood there for a moment, watching the workers continue with the fence installation. Derek was right about one thing. A lawsuit would take months, maybe years. By then, they'd be so established that removing them would be nearly impossible. But as I looked around the site, I noticed something Derek had missed. There were no silt fences or erosion controls anywhere. The graded area ran right down to within 50 feet of the creek that ran through my property. Any heavy rain would wash chemicals and runoff straight into the water. I just wanted to make sure you were certain about your position, I said to Derek's back. Thank you for the advice. He waved me off without turning around. Yeah, whatever. Don't let the gate hit you on your way out. I walked back to my truck and drove home. My wife was waiting on the porch, and the look on her face told me she could see how angry I was. What's going on up there? She asked. I told her everything I'd seen and heard, about the gravel pad and the containers and Derek's smug dismissal, about his suggestion that I sue them if I didn't like it. So what are we going to do? She asked. I thought about that for a moment. Derek had made one critical assumption. He assumed that because he worked for a big corporation with lawyers and contracts, the law was just a suggestion for him. What he forgot was that in this county, the law has teeth, and I know exactly where to find them. Derek told me to sue them, I said. I've decided to do something much, much faster. I went into my office and pulled out my camera, the good one with the telephoto lens that I used for wildlife photography. Then I drove back to the highway corner and parked where I could see the entire site. I spent the next hour taking high-resolution photos of everything. The gravel pad, the containers with their hazardous material placards, the fence going up, the complete lack of any environmental protection measures, the proximity to the creek. But most importantly, I photographed the access point where they'd been driving their heavy equipment on and off the highway. There was no curb cut, no proper entrance. They'd just been driving across the shoulder in the drainage ditch like it was their personal driveway. When I got home, I didn't call a lawyer. Instead, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to the county building inspector. The second was to the State Environmental Protection Agency. The third was to the State Department of Transportation. The building inspector was a guy named Jim who I'd known for about 15 years. He'd inspected some improvements we'd made to our barn a few years back. Jim, this is OP out at the ranch. I've got a situation I think you need to know about. I told him about the construction site that had appeared on my land while I was away, about the gravel pad and the containers and the complete absence of any permits that I was aware of. Let me get this straight, Jim said. They built the industrial pad on your property without your knowledge or consent? That's right. And when I confronted the site manager, he told me they had permits and a lease agreement, but he wouldn't show me either one. What's the address? I gave him the location and explained how to find it. I'll be out there first thing tomorrow morning. If they don't have permits for construction on private land, this is going to be a very short conversation. The call to the EPA took longer. I had to work my way through several departments before I found someone who cared about unauthorized industrial sites near water sources. But once I described the situation to a woman named Patricia, she got very interested very quickly. You said the containers are marked for hazardous materials? That's right. And the graded area runs right down toward a creek with no erosion control whatsoever. That's a violation of several federal regulations. We'll have someone out there within 48 hours. The call to the Department of Transportation was the shortest. I explained about the unauthorized access to the state highway, and the man I spoke with just sighed like he dealt with this kind of thing every day. We'll have someone check it out tomorrow. If they don't have a curb cut permit, we'll issue a cease and desist for highway access immediately. After I made the calls, I felt better than I had since discovering the site. Derek thought that because he worked for a big corporation, he could just steamroll over a small rancher. What he didn't understand was that bureaucracy cuts both ways. If you want to play by the rules, you actually have to follow them. The next morning, I made myself a pot of coffee and drove back up to the highway corner to watch the show. The workers were already there continuing work on the fence. Derek was standing in the middle of the pad with his clipboard looking very much like a man in charge of his domain. Around 9 o'clock, Jim's pickup truck turned off the highway and bounced across the shoulder to the makeshift entrance. Derek walked over to meet him with the confident stride of a man who had all his paperwork in order. I was too far away to hear the conversation, but I could see Derek pointing at his clipboard and then at various parts of the site. Jim was nodding and taking notes. Then Jim asked Derek something, and Derek's whole demeanor changed. His confident posture sagged, and he started making gestures that looked increasingly desperate. Jim walked around the site for about 20 minutes, taking photos and measurements. Then he went back to his truck and started writing what looked like a very long document. When he was done, he handed it to Derek and pointed to several places on the paper. Derek read it, and even from a distance I could see his face go pale. After Jim left, Derek spent about 10 minutes on his phone, pacing back and forth across the gravel pad. When he hung up, he looked in my direction and saw me watching from across the fence line. To my surprise, he walked over. "Still haven't served those papers yet?" he called out with forced cheerfulness. "Lawyers too expensive?" I just waved and smiled. "Have a great day, Derek." His forced smile faltered a little, but he walked back to his crew and started giving orders. I could see him trying to project confidence, but something had shaken him. I had a pretty good idea what that something was. Around 11, a white state vehicle pulled off the highway, Department of Transportation. The inspector spent about 30 minutes documenting the unauthorized highway access, then went over to talk to Derek. This conversation was shorter but no less intense. When it was over, Derek was on his phone again, and this time he looked genuinely panicked. I decided to head home for lunch and let Derek stew for a while. As I was driving back, my phone rang. It was Jim. "OP, you need to know that site up on your corner is in serious violation of about 6 different codes. They don't have a building permit, they don't have an environmental impact assessment, and they sure as hell don't have permission to build industrial infrastructure on private land. What happens now?" I issued a summary abatement order. They have to stop all work immediately and remove everything within 72 hours, or they start paying $10,000 a day in fines. $10,000 a day? That's right. And that's just the county fine. The state's going to have their own penalties for the highway access violation. And if the EPA gets involved, well, those fines make ours look like pocket change. I thanked Jim and hung up feeling very satisfied. Derek wanted to play hardball with someone he thought was just an old rancher who didn't understand how the world worked. He was about to learn that the world had rules, and those rules had consequences. That afternoon, I got a call from Patricia at the EPA. Their inspector would be out the next day, but based on my photos and description, they were treating this as an unauthorized industrial site with potential environmental contamination. If they're storing hazardous materials without proper containment near a water source, that's a federal violation. The fines start at $50,000 and go up from there. The next morning, I was back at my observation post bright and early. Derek was there with his crew, but something was different. Instead of the confident efficiency of the previous days, there was a lot of standing around and confused discussion. Derek was on his phone constantly, and he looked like a man whose world was falling apart. Around 10 o'clock, a black SUV with corporate plates pulled onto the site. A man in an expensive suit got out and immediately started having what looked like a very heated conversation with Derek. Even from a distance, I could see the suit pointing at various parts of the site while Derek gestured helplessly at his clipboard. This had to be someone from corporate headquarters, someone with actual authority who'd been brought in to deal with the crisis that Derek's overconfidence had created. The EPA inspector arrived around noon in a government vehicle that practically screamed federal authority. She spent 2 hours going over every inch of the site with monitoring equipment and a camera. When she was done, she handed Derek a document that was significantly thicker than the one Jim had given him. Derek took the document over to the man in the suit, and they had another intense conversation. This time, the suit was doing most of the talking, and Derek looked like he wanted to crawl into one of the shipping containers and disappear. Around 2 in the afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Is this OP?" The voice was smooth and professional, the kind that belonged to someone who was used to making problems go away. "It is." "This is Marcus. I'm a vice president with Omni Logistics. I understand there may have been some confusion about our facility on your property." "Confusion? That's an interesting way to put it. I'd like to meet with you to discuss a solution that works for everyone. Would this afternoon be convenient?" "I'll be at my house in an hour." Marcus arrived in the black SUV with Derek in the passenger seat. Derek looked like he'd aged about 5 years in the past 2 days. Marcus, on the other hand, looked like exactly what he was, a corporate problem solver with an expensive suit and a briefcase full of solutions. We sat on my front porch and Marcus got straight to business. "It seems there was a miscommunication about the boundaries of our lease agreement," he began. "We had a lease with your neighbor for industrial storage, but due to some surveying errors, we ended up building on your land instead." "Surveying errors?" "That's right, honest mistake, but the facility is already built and relocating it would be extremely expensive. We'd like to offer you a lease agreement for the land we're currently using, $500 a month." I looked at Derek, who was staring at his shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. $500 a month for industrial storage of hazardous materials? "We could go as high as 1,000, Marcus said quickly. "It really would be a win-win situation." "What about the permits?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "We're working on getting those sorted out. These things take time, but we have good relationships with the regulatory agencies." I leaned back in my chair and studied both of them. Marcus was trying to project confidence, but there were sweat stains under his arms despite the cool weather. Derek looked like he was contemplating a career change. "The county building inspector says you have 72 hours to remove everything or start paying $10,000 a day in fines. We're appealing that decision. The EPA says the site is an environmental hazard because of the proximity to the creek and the lack of containment for hazardous materials. That's just preliminary. Once we get the proper permits, and the state says you're illegally accessing the highway without a curb cut permit." Marcus's composure was starting to crack. "Look, we're willing to work with you here. What would it take to make this situation go away?" I thought about that for a moment. What would it take? It would take going back in time and asking permission before building industrial infrastructure on my family's land. It would take showing some respect for the law and for other people's property rights. It would take not calling me an old-timer and telling me to sue them if I didn't like being robbed. "You want to know what it would take?" I said. "It would take you never having built that thing in the first place." I stood up. "You've got until tomorrow evening to have every piece of gravel, every foot of fence, and every shipping container off my land. If it's not gone by then, I'll be filing charges for criminal trespassing." Marcus started to say something, but I held up my hand. "There's something else you should know. Since the equipment and containers are on my land without a lease or my permission, they're legally abandoned property. I've already contacted a private towing company that specializes in industrial recovery. They'll be here at sunset tomorrow to impound everything that's left. I understand those containers have about $500,000 worth of specialized equipment in them." Marcus went completely pale. "You can't do that." "Actually, I can. State property law is very clear about abandoned items on private land. The towing company has already put liens on the containers. If you want them back, you'll have to pay the recovery fees and storage costs." Derek finally looked up from his shoes. "How much are the recovery fees?" "About $50,000, plus storage at $500 a day." Marcus stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. "This is extortion. No, this is property law. Something your site manager here should have looked into before he told me to sue you." They left without another word. Derek looked back once as they were driving away, and I gave him a little wave. The next morning, I was awakened at dawn by the sound of heavy machinery. I looked out the window and saw a convoy of trucks heading toward the highway corner. Emergency restoration crews working around the clock cost a lot more than regular contractors, but when you're facing $10,000 a day fines, I guess expense becomes relative. I made my coffee and drove up to watch the show. It was like watching a construction site in reverse. The shipping containers were loaded onto flatbed trucks. The fence was disassembled section by section. The gravel pad was scraped up and hauled away by the ton. Derek was there, but now he was wearing work clothes instead of his management polo shirt. He was actually helping to dismantle the fence he'd been so proud of just a few days earlier. Every now and then he'd look over at where I was sitting in my lawn chair with my coffee, and I'd give him a friendly wave. The restoration work continued through the night. They brought in floodlights so the crew could keep working. By morning, they were trucking in topsoil and grass seed to restore the site to something resembling its original condition. Marcus came by the house around noon with a check and a legal document. $50,000, he said, handing me the check. Restoration settlement to avoid any criminal charges. I looked at the check and the accompanying paperwork. It was a settlement agreement that basically said they'd pay me for the damage to my land in exchange for me not filing criminal trespassing charges. This is more than fair, Marcus said. Probably more than you'd get in civil court, and you don't have to wait years for a judgment. I signed the papers and took the check. Marcus looked relieved for the first time since I'd met him. I hope there are no hard feelings, he said. This was just an unfortunate misunderstanding. No hard feelings at all, I said. But you might want to talk to Derek about his customer service skills. As they were driving away, I could see Derek slumped in the passenger seat like a man who'd learned some hard lessons about the difference between corporate authority and actual authority. The restoration work was finished 3 days later. Where the gravel pad had been, there was now fresh sod and a split rail fence that actually looked better than what had been there before. The creek was cleaner too. They'd installed proper drainage and erosion controls as part of the restoration. I used part of the settlement money to build something I'd been thinking about for years. A beautiful stone entrance to the ranch with pillars on either side of our main gate. We had a sign made that I mounted right in the middle where everyone driving by could see it. Private property. We don't need to sue. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Long-time lurker, but I finally have something to share that's happened within the last few months. I work as a senior graphic designer for a company for 5 years now. Originally, it was only a team of 3, a marketing manager, a marketing executive, and myself. The former 2 have since quit, and you'll find out later why. A huge part of my job is to handle a huge advertising schedule in a project management system, PMS, for which I design print/digital ads for. Enter my difficult micromanaging manager. He's the VP of Sales and Marketing who's been with the company for 30+ years. His way of quality control is to force all our marketing materials to go through an approval process in our PMS in which everyone else has to give their feedback, and only then will my manager give the final sign-off once it reaches him. On top of that, he insists on being copied on every notification for every single step of the way. So every single ad I produced had to be sent through our PMS while tagging the product managers and proofreaders. Those individuals would then comment feedback for changes needed, or if the ad is approved, they'd mark it complete and then send it along to the next person. It would end with this micromanaging manager who'd have the final say on whether it's good to be sent out or not. Sometimes the process would be flawless as everyone would approve it the first time with no changes needed. But when it got to my manager, he'd reject it and I'd have to do it over pending his remarks. The thing with our PMS is that you can see timestamps of when people viewed updates. He's on our project board, so he gets all the updates, and he could have easily interceded earlier and let me know if changes were needed to pass his check so I'd not waste my time. But because of the way he is, he only wants to see the final drafts after everyone else sees them. Everyone else always seems to move things along in a timely fashion, but when it finally gets to my manager, he'd just let it sit, and then you'd have to constantly check to see if he marked it off. When I pushed back and stated how arduous this all is, his tone-deaf reply was to have it done 3 months in advance. He also insisted that the ads I produced have to look different each time for each publication's insertion order. So after 4 years of handling all this by myself, I was barely meeting deadlines, and the quality of my work started slipping as I was making really stupid mistakes. Every few months, I would ask my manager if we're going to hire an additional designer for our department since we're doing more marketing, and every year I'd hear, "It's not in our budget right now." Things came to a head during one of my biannual reviews, where I told my manager bluntly, in front of HR, that we desperately needed to hire an additional designer, as there was no way for me to hit the 3 months ahead goal that he keeps parroting. He actually asked me, and I quote, "Is it typical for companies to have more than one graphic designer?" I'm dead serious. I showed how I handled everything by myself as best as I could at that point, and I was getting burnt out. For those that may ask why I stay, they compensate me very well without having to commute into a major metropolitan city, a golden handcuffs situation, if you will. By the end of the meeting, my manager finally caved and gave me permission to hire an additional designer who started with us this past January. While showing him the ropes on our design systems, he told me the manager said something snarky to him along the lines of, "I never imagined having to hire 2 designers. You guys should have no problem being 3 months ahead on ads now." Are you kidding me? Over the years, I watched my manager as he hired a plethora of account executives and replacements for our department, most of whom quit within months under his watch, but he's going to give me crap for needing one designer after I made things work for 4 years by myself? I was so infuriated by his comments that I decided, he wants ads done 3 months in advance? Okay, bet. I trained the new designer on our approach to the advertising schedule in the PMS and the ins and outs of the approval process, and we went to work. We both proceeded to bury my manager in notifications as we churned out ad after ad after ad, pushing items through the pipeline with my manager receiving notifications on every single update. When the tasks ended at him and we got no response, we set up automations to ping him every hour calling for his approval. We also would send detailed weekly reports stating our progress, and also made it inherently clear to mention our goal was to be 3 months ahead of deadlines. By this past May, in time for one of my biannual reviews, my manager made an announcement. He announced my coworker, the marketing assistant, would be promoted to the vacant marketing manager position. Furthermore, they would now be handling the advertising schedule and be the final point person going forward. My manager also asked to have all notifications for him be removed as he didn't have the bandwidth anymore to monitor it and is taking a step back from overseeing us. We collectively broke my manager after only 5 months of doing exactly what he asked, and I've got to say things have improved greatly so far. Our new marketing manager is very laid back as we're still getting things done ahead of schedule, and he is really good at what he does. We've also since hired 2 more additional employees for our department, and we've been steadily growing. My newly promoted coworker recently joked with me and the junior designer about how he wanted to go over the advertising schedule for next year with our manager, but he elected to not see anything and fully trusted my coworker to handle it completely on his own. Funny how that works. The next one is an entitled people story. Hello everyone. Like many of you, I have read these stories with delight and a healthy dose of skepticism, because surely people like this can't really exist. But oh boy was I wrong, because apparently the global Karen distribution system decided that it was my turn to encounter these wonderful specimens in the wild. This story has the following cast: me, 35 minutes, woman 1, woman 2, and woman 3, henceforth known as Dumb, Dumber, Dumbest. The setting is ever windy Copenhagen, and it took place a day ago. My migraine-exhausted self had managed to drag me down to the nearest corner shop, because remember kids, when you're sick, you get to spoil yourselves. I'm almost at the shop, when a car parks on the street next to me. Out comes Dumb, Dumber, and Dumbest, all of them women that looked like they were in the early 20s, and enough makeup to make a drag queen jealous. But Dumber doesn't only get out of the car, no. She gets out and then proceeds to dump her bag of half-eaten fries on the ground. Now perhaps I should just have kept my mouth shut, but in sick and tired of people using public spaces as their personal garbage dump. It cost money to clean up, money that could have been used for homelessness, elder care, or hospitals. So I tell her, you drop something. No reaction, just completely ignoring me and the trash she just dumped on the ground. Same goes for Dumb and Dumbest. At this point, my Nordic uncomfortableness with speaking to strangers takes over, so I give up and walk to the corner shop. While I pay for my candy, I see the holy trinity of entitlement entering the same shop. Now this is where I definitely should have just walked away. But what can I say? Few things are more annoying than people who think the rest of the world exists to clean up after them. So while they were in the shop, I walk to their car, take the gross half-eaten bag of fries, and dump it on their car. Because clearly these people only understand the concept of cleaning up when it applies to their own thing. I then start walking home. And at this point, I am dead tired, my head is aching, and my nervous system is definitely not happy. I then notice a car slowing down near me. Oh, hurrah, it's the same girls. Lucky me. And I kid you not, Dumbest actually rolled down her window and beckons at me with a finger. This absolute waste of space is seriously doing the whole entitled customer summoning a lowly servant routine. Now things are a bit blurry from this point. I cannot remember the whole conversation line for line. So, here's my best attempt. Dumbest start out with a tirade of, if I have a problem with them littering, I should just pick up their trash and throw it out. I mean, who thinks like that? Of course I am having none of her nonsense. So I tell her exactly what I think of entitled people like them, probably quite rudely, not letting this sorry excuse for a human talk over me. At this point, Dumb, who was sitting in the back seat, takes out her phone out and start filming me. Here I'm rather proud at how I reacted in a stressful situation. I looked at the camera and said something along the lines of, "Hey everyone, what is happening right now is that these three girls apparently think the world is their garbage dump, and the rest of us apparently only exist just to clean up after them." Dumb have that oh look and takes her phone down. I'm guessing she realized that her little video plan would backfire spectacular if she kept recording me telling the truth. Now back to Dumbest. She spends a few seconds doing a great impression of a goldfish who's clearly been viciously assaulted by a mad makeup artist. Her plan was clearly giving me a lecture on oh so graciously letting me pick up their trash while filming me. But since I so very rudely had sabotaged that, she reached for insults. Why was I shaking? I was so tired. Why did I have so gross earrings? I have stretches. It was pathetic kindergarten insults, and I told her so, and added that if that was her best attempt, then this conversation were over. Oh, and of course to effing clean up after themselves. I then turned away from the car, which turned out to be a good idea, because then the suddenly flying plastic bottle hit my shoulder instead of my eyes. Now I should of course just have called the police at this point, but I was in fight mode, so I picked up the bottle and threw it back. It missed the open car window, which was probably good, but it did hit the car, which is probably also not good, but oh so satisfying. They then speeded up and drove away while laughing. I was pretty shaken at the object nearly missing my eyes, but some lovely bystanders came over and helped me calm down. So, what's the morale, kids? Don't do what I did. But if you end up doing the same, then never feel bad. People like this are empty humans, who only have room inside for themselves. They only understand consequences. Oh, and to any fellow Danes, Hallie Holloy. If you stumble across a video of someone with a blue cap and car window, please DM me. The police would very much like to identify that lovely bottle-throwing trio. Anyway, thank you for watching.